On this episode of the London, Ontario Real Estate Podcast, I'm going to be updating you on what I'm currently seeing in the market as we are now into 2026. Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Welcome back to the London, Ontario Real Estate Podcast. My name is Phil Bailey, and I'm a local real estate agent right here in the Forest City. I help people buy and sell homes and condos in London every single day, and I'm happy to share my insight of what I'm seeing on the ground as a local real estate agent. What we saw from the latest stats, which are from December of 2025, we're now into January, so those were just released a little while ago. We saw only 398 homes were exchanged in the month for the area. This is up actually slightly over December of 2024. So we usually like to compare month over month activity because, December 2024 versus December 2025 is a lot more important than December 2025 versus April of 2024, when usually things are a little bit busier. This year has been interesting. What I found if we recap 2025, we saw actually a bit of activity earlier on in the year, more than I even thought. We were going to multiple offers on a lot of properties, definitely unique properties in good areas with, the good schools, quote unquote. But what I noticed is that it kind of fizzled out as we got into the spring. I think perhaps more inventory came onto the market. Lots more inventory came in the market. Buyers didn't catch up with that inventory. And what that meant is that buyers could be really choosy. And I think there's a lot of trepidation right now with buyers. I think buyers, to be honest, are some of the most picky I have seen, which is a good thing, I think, for buyers right now in the market. They can be picky. They can wait. They can set up a showing, do a second showing, even do a third showing sometimes before they're putting in an offer on a property. If it's a really hot moving property, obviously that isn't possible. And as we're into January, I'm noticing perhaps some of the same as what we saw in early 2025. So now that we're into 2026, what I think is starting to happen is that there's a lot of cancellations that were happening. So we're seeing a lot of cancellations usually before the holidays or maybe even at the end of the year. And some of those homes have not come back on the market. I think there's a bit of a wait and see perspective right now for buyers and even for sellers as well, to kind of see what happens with the market, see if perhaps the market starts picking up. We see some positive signs in the market before we list a home. I think when it comes to pricing strategy right now, you have to be very, very specific. And you have to also look at the most recent data that we have. This is not always easy. What I'm finding right now is that the pricing that's working well has to be competitive with things that have happened very recently. If you're going back to the pandemic and hoping that your price will be somehow related to those numbers that we were seeing, I think you're really maybe selling yourself short here, and you're not going to be able to get those numbers. So what I'm seeing is there's a lot of homes. There's kind of a few different categories. I think one category is homes that are coming onto the market and they're priced way too high. Then I'm assuming they're seeing no listing activity at all, no showings, no offers, not even any questions about the listing. And then you're seeing a pretty big come down to reality price drop. So you may have a property that's priced at $999,000, and really the market's telling us maybe it's more like an $850,000 property. Then you're seeing a big price drop to say $899,000, and then eventually they're maybe getting a deal done closer to that $850,000 mark. What I'm also seeing though is what I call death by 1,000 cuts. And that is where you're pricing something at the $999,000 mark, and you're thinking that maybe a $10,000 drop is really going to leverage you, even though there's not comparables to back this up, but it's going to leverage you into getting showings. And that's honestly just not the case if you're priced out to a price that just doesn't make sense. So I'm going to say, as long as you're within a healthy range of the pricing, usually you can get the job done and you can sell. And what a healthy range is, so say something's selling at $850, if you're priced at like $899, $875-ish, usually you can get people to at least see the property and think that they have a chance to buy it at a price that makes sense for them and for the market. But you have to remember that there's always three numbers. There's what the seller wants, what the buyer wants to pay, and then there was actually what the market is saying. I think that some sellers really need to have that moment where they're looking at what's been happening much more recently, and they have to almost forget about the pandemic because that was a very strange period of time. And as you know, prices were going up like crazy because people didn't know how long they'd be in their home for. There was a literal pandemic, so it was something that hopefully we won't see for the while, maybe ever. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm a real estate agent, but what I would say is that we have to be very, very careful to almost get those numbers out of your mind. That said, if you look at what was happening in, say, 2017, 2018, and then you take that pandemic period out completely, prices are still up considerably over that year. So you have to look at, I think, more of what's a normal rise in prices. And again, look at what's happened recently. Don't go back, 5 years or 3 years or whatever into the pandemic period and think that that's what you're going to get. What would be my advice for buyers right now in 2026? It's going to be similar to what my advice usually is, but I had a lot of good conversations this week, and we're into early January now. And the conversations that I'm having are usually the conversations that I see people have the most success with when they buy in a year. And what that means is they're prepared. They're talking to me early in the year. They're ready with their criteria to a certain degree. And if not, we're able to assess what their criteria should be through, obviously, ask them questions. They're also pre-approved for their mortgage, and they're really serious and they're ready to go. These people usually will do well because when inventory really does usually increase as we get into that more spring market. I mean, and again, it's not typically just when spring happens. It could happen in February, March if the weather's nice, right? What I'm finding is those people are ready to purchase because they already have their criteria down. They've even looked at potentially some homes already, and they have the pre-approval ready to go. So there's nothing holding them back when the right home comes on the market and they're ready to go. There's another category that always happens in the year. And I've done this for, over a decade now. And what I found is this other category is people that see stuff moving and they get excited by this stuff moving, which is fantastic. But they're maybe not ready to go yet because they haven't done their pre-approval yet. They haven't even, talked about their criteria with me. And then they call me in April, May. And believe me, folks, call me whenever the heck you want. I don't care if it's, honestly, I think we were talking to some folks on Christmas Eve, and I'm totally happy to chat about real estate whenever. But what I think is interesting is that I think a lot of those people are falling behind. So my advice is, try to get, if you're going to buy in 2026 and you're pretty sure you're going to, try to get your criteria down now. Try to, if you're going to talk to me as your real estate agent or someone else as your real estate agent, have that conversation because they're probably going to have some questions and they could probably share some information on what they're seeing in the market. And then, of course, talk to a mortgage broker or your bank and get your pre-approval done. With a pre-approval, and I know I've talked about this again on the podcast, but if you're looking at buying a home in 2026, why is the pre-approval so important? Because they're going to ask you for documents. And if they don't ask you for documents and they have no job letter from you, they have no idea, what your latest pay stub is or anything, that's not a pre-approval. So be careful with just going and saying, oh, I think I'm good up to this amount based on an online calculator that I've done. And I'm sure I've done online calculators before to see how much, what mortgage I could do. But what I also do, and what's actually much more important, is I talk to the mortgage broker that I trust in London and that I work with, and I say, hey, what is the amount that I can actually get? What documents do you need? Okay, cool. Let me fill out an application. Let me give you the documents. And then what that mortgage broker can do is they can update me on rates over time. They can update me on what if my income changes in some way. And I mean, I have a weird income because I'm self-employed. But if I'm, looking at my wife's income as well, we can make sure that we have the latest job letter ready to go. And then when you're buying a home, usually you're only given 5 business days for a financing condition. That would be what I'd say is typical still. So if you have 5 business days and you're still waiting for a job letter and this and this and this, and they can't get it to you on time, well, then your conditional period is over and you may end up losing out on a property that you really, really wanted to purchase because of really a clerical, being behind on not clerical error, but, they're behind on what they're seeing. So you have to be very careful, I think, if you're gonna make a move, to just get your ducks in a row now. I was talking to some clients some new clients that are ready to purchase. And before they even talk to me, they already have their pre-approval ready to go. I mean, they're the kind of dream clients across the board. But I want you to know that if you don't know anything about this stuff and you haven't done it before, that's where I'm here for. I'm here to help. I'm here to steer you to other professionals that will also help you. And you can really be ready to go and hit the ground running as we get into 2026. So, what are my predictions for the year? This is the first podcast of 2026. I am not a prediction guy. As you know, I don't like making predictions based on the crystal ball that I never got for Christmas this year. But I think it is interesting to see where the market is starting out right now. I think it is definitely starting to move a little bit. And I'm curious to see if that'll be reminiscent of what we saw in 2025. I still think interest rates are a big story here, and we have to see what happens with interest rates if they keep going down. But so far, interest rates have gone down considerably, over the last year, and we haven't seen this huge spur in the market. I think we've seen a relatively flat market in the last 12 months. I say you're probably in a balance to buyer's market right now. So buyers are given more opportunity to purchase. But you have to remember that that's very neighborhood dependent, very home type dependent. If you have a home in a specific school area that everyone wants, that has the perfect, 3 or 4 bedrooms and the bathroom layout, the kitchen's redone and it's a great lot, yeah, that house is probably going to sell still. But if you have 10 different options of, new builds that were built in 2021, and you have and a buyer has lots of options to choose from, obviously, those are areas where I think the market will definitely be a little slower for those folks in 2026. So again, my prediction is I'm going to be a very political answer here and say I don't really know. And I think anyone that tells you they know exactly what's going to happen, you should probably potentially not listen to them completely. But I think that you could see a market that is, has a little bit of life. It probably is still relatively flat for 2026. And there's probably lots of options out there for buyers. If things change, I'll definitely report back on the London, Ontario Real Estate Podcast. I am planning on doing these podcasts a little bit more often. 2025 was extremely busy in a great way. I thank all my clients for making it that way. It was the busiest year I've ever had as a real estate agent by a huge amount. And I loved every minute of it, but I think sometimes I missed out on doing some of these proactive podcasts that I want to share information with all of you. So I'm going to commit to doing the podcast a lot more in this year. I'd say at least every few weeks is kind of my goal for 2026. But if you have questions between the podcasts, or you have a topic that you want me to talk about on the podcast, or even you want to come join me on the podcast, I'm very open to ideas for that as well. You can just send me a text message for any of your real estate questions or podcast questions. My direct number is 226-977-2348. So 226-977-2348, or just go to my website. It's just philbailey.ca. Whenever I put my number out on the podcast, I get a lot of people that want to sell me things. I'm always happy to listen, but really, I think right now this is supposed to be for people that have actual, real estate questions that want to get, my thoughts on potentially buying or selling in the London, Ontario area, or they just have a question even for 5 years from now. I'm happy to help with anyone that's looking at getting into real estate, or that even has anything positive or negative to say about the podcast. So yeah, we are into January of 2026, folks. This has been the London, Ontario Real Estate Podcast, the kickoff episode of 2026. There's a little bit of an update in the market, what I'm seeing when it comes to prices, and then certain strategies that buyers and sellers can use right now in the market. I will be digging deeper into these topics as we get into 2026 more, and I'm always here to help. Message me at any time. I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Take care.